Proverbs chapter 18, beginning in verse 9. He who is slothful in his work is a brother to him who is a great destroyer. Now that might sound strange to us, but if you think about it, it's true. All right, let's just say that there is supposed to be a tower. A tower is built. All right, well, with the sloth, or the sluggard, because that's who we're talking about, with the sloth, the tower was never built. With the destroyer, the tower was destroyed. Either way, there is no tower. There's nothing there. With the destroyer, he just goes and destroys what was done. With the slothful, he doesn't do what was supposed to be done. In both cases, nothing is there. There is nothing was produced, or whatever was produced was destroyed. Now it's not there anymore. But with the sloth, you have neglected work. Something is never finished. It is, in fact, incomplete, or it was never started, or, once again, nothing was ever produced. Nothing actually occurred. Now, we come to these next two verses, and we are going to compare them, but we're going to do more than that in this. All right, verse 10. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. Okay, so here is this Psalm 61 and 3, also Psalm 44 and 2, my high tower and deliverer. We have numerous psalms that speak of God as protector. Numerous ones, and also numerous examples. 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 47. David tells Goliath, the battle belongs to the Lord. All right, so it doesn't go to the strong, it doesn't go to the well-equipped, it doesn't go to the one with the greater technology, the one who happens to be a giant. The battle doesn't belong to them, the battle belongs to God. And that is the message in all of this, that the name of the Lord, there is the strong tower. There is protection in Him. The righteous run to Him and are safe. He provides complete shelter. But it's the righteous that run to Him, because the unrighteous don't want to run to Him. That's the difference. The righteous know that He is the deliverer. They know He is a strong tower, and they will go to Him. Now we go to verse 11, because these two are connected. They are connected. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall in his own esteem. All right? Now, we're going to look at this a little bit more, but we're going to go through something quickly and then get to it. But I just want to make mention of Revelation chapter 3 and verse 17, where you have Jesus talking about that of let me make sure I get the right congregation here. In Revelation chapter 3, it is Laodicea, who is wait a minute, let me make sure I got that right. Yeah, it's Laodicea, saying, I am rich, have become wealthy, and have need of nothing. And the rich man's wealth is his strong city. Now, we're going to look a little bit further into this, but to begin with, we're going to look at, because we need to, the composition of a proverb. Okay, now, we're not going to get into too much technicality, a little bit in it, and there's more to be said concerning the way proverbs are constructed. But proverbs are typically in couplets. Usually we think of couplets like in poetry, and yeah, they are, but they don't have to be. Well, proverbs are made out of couplets. And in defining a couplet is two successive lines of verse forming a unit marked usually by rhythmic correspondence, having the same number of syllables, but that's not Hebrew poetry, and nor is that Proverbs. Marked by rhyme, that's not Hebrew poetry either. Hebrew poetry does not rhyme, but here it is, or the inclusion of a self-contained utterance. That is a proverb, and that's what proverbs are. They're couplets with self-contained utterances. That something is being spoken, and the first line and the second line go together in giving you a message. And they are self-contained, meaning we could take them out and just use a single proverb. We can do that. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. All right, period. We can use that as a singular point of wisdom. Little bit of proverb, little bit of wisdom. Can we use more than that? Yes, but this is self-contained. It doesn't need any more. Now, not everything in Proverbs is going to be just, as we may think, 2 lines. Of course, we have the beginning of the book of Proverbs, which really most of that is not a proverb at all. It is a discussion of wisdom. But when we get to the Proverbs, they're going to be in couplets, but it could be sets of couplets. Now, there is what's known as the closed couplet. It's a complete thought in 2 lines, and that's exactly what we were just talking about. Such as 27:3, a stone is heavy and sand is weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than both of them. All right, that's self-contained. We understand what that means. And we have the opening phrase. Now, and we have a separation. We have a separation not only with an idea, but in this case with a comma, but you don't always get a comma. And commas and punctuation, that's a thing that we have put in English. The Hebrews didn't have such things. But this is the way that we do it grammatically in English. Then you have the closing phrase. You have the opening phrase and the closing phrase. But a fool's wrath is heavier than both of them. I'm sorry. So the opening phrase may not give the full meaning, and we should never limit a proverb to just the opening phrase, because that's just half. And it is also setting the stage for what comes next. You may not even know where this is heading. And it has to have the second part of the couplet, and that is the closing phrase is needed. And if we were just to look at 27:8, like a bird that wanders from its nest. All right, that's the first part of that proverb. All right, it's meaningless without the other. Okay? It's meaningless. You have to have the second phrase with it. Well, now let's look at a closing phrase. Closing phrase is going to enhance, fill out, emphasize, or direct the meaning set by the opening phrase. And we should never limit a proverb with the closing phrase only. You're doing the same thing. You're only getting part of the message, and it may be a complete mystery when you take half of it out. You're going to have a complete mystery. So the first part of the couplet is setting the stage. And then the second, like I said, it's going to enhance or fill out or direct the meaning. That's what it does. Now, Proverbs 23:20. This is the closing phrase of 23:20. Or with gluttonous eaters of meat. Well, what does that mean? Or gluttonous eaters of meat. That you realize, I don't have the full message. Well, you don't, because half of it is missing. So just like with the other one, like a bird. Now this is 27:8. Like a bird that wanders from its nest. Well, you don't know what that means. 23:20, or with gluttonous eaters of meat. That's the last half of the proverb. Well, it doesn't make any sense. You have to have both parts. The opening phrase begins the subject. The closing phrase, as we said, it may direct it. It will complete it. Whatever it does, it may fill out the meaning. It may be that the first like what we just had with a stone is heavy and sand is weighty. All right, well, we need a little bit more direction than that. Okay, and so the closing phrase is going to complete it. It's going to direct us into the meaning itself. Now, and we come back to 27:3. A stone is heavy and sand is weighty. All right, we don't have the full meaning. All right, why is this important? Why do we need to know this? Well, we come with the closing phrase, but a fool's wrath is heavier than both of them. Now we get the message. Now we have a better understanding, a full understanding of what it means. It compares the weight of stone and sand to a fool's wrath, which means a fool will strike hard and a fool can be very vicious. And we just ask the question, a fool's wrath is going to be limited by what? By the fool. That's the only thing that's going to limit a fool's wrath, and which means depends on the fool you got. And that's what it's going to come to. It depends on who that fool is and just how far they're going to take this wrath. And but here is just this warning in a proverb form. Now, here we go into understanding a proverb. And proverbs may have similar wording but different meaning. And it can take a little bit of work to come to a better conclusion. It can take a little more work. And we know from the introduction of Proverbs that it spoke of such things, the wise and their riddles. Well, it takes a little bit of work to understand a riddle. It takes a little bit of work. And you have those enigmas. Well, it takes a little bit of work. These are mysterious sayings. It takes a little bit of work to understand that. All right, so they can have similar wording but different meanings. No, how do we interpret a proverb? And we're going to compare Proverbs 10:15 and 18:11. That's what, and we've come to 18:11 now, but we're going to compare it to 10:15. All right, 10:15, I've got the first phrase, or the first part of the couplet, the opening phrase in blue, closing phrase in red. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. Now we come to 18:11. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall in his own esteem. Do they mean the same? Well, the beginning of both of these proverbs is identical. It is identical. Both of them have the same opening phrase. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. But could it be that there is a different message because the closing statement, the closing phrase is different? And in case you're just wondering, are these absolutely identical? Yeah, here's the Hebrew for both of them. And you just compare the Hebrew. The Hebrew is identical. They have the same opening phrase. They have different closing phrases. They have the same opening, though. And could it be that we can come to different conclusions, that these are teaching something different from each other? All right, so understanding a proverb. A proverb could be understood, might be understood alone as a self-contained utterance. It can be. As we've already stated, there's a way that seems right unto a man, but the way thereof is the way of death. All right, the end thereof is the way of death. That's a self-contained utterance. We pretty much get it. All right, it doesn't take a whole lot else. But some things take a little extra. And a proverb will be understood by the rest of Proverbs. It will be. And a proverb will be understood by the rest of Scripture in understanding and also having the faith in it, but in understanding that Scripture will never contradict itself, ever. If you have two Scriptures that are contradicting, it could be that your understanding of one is wrong or your understanding of both is wrong, or there is a reason why it is contradicting. There's a reason why it is. Answer a fool according to his folly, immediately followed by, do not answer a fool according to his folly. Okay, that would seem to be contradictory. Well, yeah, they're placed there together for a reason, not as a blatant contradiction. Don't you see what you just wrote? Like 2 lines earlier, answer not a fool according to his folly. Now you're saying don't answer a fool according to his folly. There's a reason for it. Give a little bit of a break to our God. He's going to put everything perfect. All right, Proverbs can be understood, a proverb can be understood by the rest of Scripture. And there is, I could, and it would take me a bit, but I could, you could too, take a chapter of Proverbs. Let's just say chapter 18. Take a chapter of Proverbs, and then we could look at a specific section of, such as the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible, and find every one of those Proverbs being fulfilled right there. Everyone, by way of example, by way of command, one way or another, we would see that. We would see it. Or taking something that would be far more of a challenge, but taking like one of the chapters of Proverbs and trying to find every one of those being fulfilled either in the Gospels or in the letters of Paul. We could do that. I am convinced we can do it. But let's interpret Proverbs 10:15 first. Let's interpret that first. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. So we're going to start by looking at the possible interpretations. All right, so our first interpretation is going to be literal, meaning it means what it says. And it's just cut and dry. There's nothing else to it. It means that a rich man's wealth is his strong city. It is a strong city. And the poor is destroyed by their own poverty. All right? Its material wealth is strength and protection. Material poverty is destruction. That's the literal interpretation. Is that the correct interpretation? Well, let's look at, is there anything, we just asked this, is there anything in the opening line or the closing line to keep us from a literal interpretation? Well, actually, there's not. From this alone, there's not a reason to take it anything other than literally. From this alone is what I'm saying. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at other proverbs. Will other proverbs prevent us from taking that interpretation, that literal interpretation? So, we can go to Proverbs 11:4. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. Now, in the red, boxed in, is 10:15. So that we can see a rich man's wealth is his strong city. Well, riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. So it doesn't seem like literal wealth is going to be a strong city at all. Proverbs 11:28. He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. All right, well, that would mean our interpretation has got to be wrong, because it's saying you can't trust in that strong city of wealth. You can't do it. So something is, our interpretation must be wrong. A literal interpretation of 10:15 must be wrong. 28 and verse 11, the rich man is wise in his own eyes, but the poor who has understanding searches him out. All right, Now that actually goes quite well with our 18 and 11 in his own esteem. But let's continue on. The rich man is wise in his own eyes. 13, 6 through 8. Let's look at all three of these. Righteousness guards him whose way is blameless, but wickedness overthrows the sinner. So this is almost absolutely parallel to 10:15, but it's not talking about material wealth, is it? It says that righteousness is going to be the guard, wealth is the strong city, wickedness overthrows the sinner, destruction is from poverty. It's the same sort of construction. It looks like it has the same sort of meaning, but using different words. Using different words. Verse 7, there is one who makes himself rich, yet has nothing, and one who makes himself poor, yet has great riches. So a rich man's wealth, well, which rich man are we talking about? Are we talking about the poor who has great riches, but he's poor? Or are we talking about, and that's a strong city, of making him a rich man, though he in fact is poor? Where could this, where is this heading? Where is this leading us? All right, so we go to verse 8. The ransom of a man's life is his riches. Look at this. But the poor does not hear rebuke. Now, that seems like it matches quite well with what was just said in verse 7, because they all go together. The one who has great riches can be poor, and the one who has nothing can make himself rich. And so, but the poor does not hear rebuke. Well, that would be the man who actually has nothing, but he's quite wealthy in material goods. All right, Proverbs 23 and verse 5. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly like an eagle toward heaven. Well, how would you call wealth a strong city if it has wings and can fly away? What happened to your strong city? What happened to that wall? It's gone. It doesn't really last very long, does it? You can't rely on it because it could vanish. Here, just watching a documentary concerning in between World War I and World War II, and of course you had the Great Depression here, but there was something far worse that occurred in Germany, of where the value of the mark went to absolutely nothing. And people's life savings couldn't even buy a loaf of bread because the value of the mark went to nothing. It had wings. Someone could have had a great amount of money in the bank, and now you can't even buy a loaf of bread with it. You're not even close to buying a loaf of bread. Prior to all that collapsing, prior to all that being done, you could have lived quite well off of the proceeds of that money. You could have lived quite well off of it. But now, once that happened, truly it did have wings. There's no security at all. There's nothing secure about it. Proverbs 28 and verse 6, better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one perverse in his ways, though he be rich. All right, so in all these, it's talking about with any kind of material wealth, that integrity is what makes you rich, but not that would be spiritually rich, not materially rich. One can be poor and still be spiritually rich. Now, one can be wealthy and still be spiritually rich. You can be. Abraham would be one like that. But one does not have to be overwhelmingly wealthy or even wealthy at all to have integrity. Anybody can have integrity. Now, literal interpretation of 10:15 does not agree with the rest of Proverbs. It just doesn't. It doesn't agree at all. Now, we go to other scripture. What do we find there? And I'm only giving you a couple of examples here because that we would spend the rest of the day, and then more so if we were to do this. Matthew 19:24. And again, I say to you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. That's a serious matter. All right, that's a serious matter. We go to James 2, beginning in verse 6. But you have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts? Do they not blaspheme that noble name by which you are called? That doesn't look to me like there is praise given to necessarily to those who are rich. It doesn't look like that. Now, what James is getting at in that is that showing that of preferential treatment to a rich man who shows up and a poor man who shows up as well, that he doesn't get the preferential treatment. He becomes like second class or third class. And such is not the case in the kingdom of heaven. That's not the case. We are all equal, and we are to treat each other equal. And we are to treat everybody else as an equal. Everyone as a special creation of God in the image of God. Now, what can we conclude in all of this? The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. This proverb cannot be taken literally. It must mean something else. It must mean that the rich man's wealth is equal to or equivalent to a good man rich in righteousness. He's not rich in material wealth, but in everything that is spiritual. In spiritual wealth, he's got that. The poor in his poverty must mean a wicked man with no righteousness to speak of. He is impoverished when it comes to righteousness. There's nothing there. That he's not poor in material wealth, but in spiritual wealth. That has to be the meaning of 10 and verse 15. That's got to be the meaning behind it. Now we go to Proverbs 18 and verse 11. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, so it starts out the same, and like a high wall in his own esteem. Now, that literally means in his own conceit. That it is a high wall in his way of thinking, in his pride. There's that deceptiveness of riches, that somehow this is going to save me from, this is going to solve every problem that comes down. I am good to go. I can tear down my barns, build bigger barns to put all of my goods in, store all of my goods, and I have many years that I can just enjoy myself. And what is the what is said to him by God? You fool, tonight your soul will be required of you. Then whose will these things be? They won't be yours. And they're not going to, just because you have all these goods stored up, does not mean you avoid that appointment with death. It can't. The appointment is already made. You can't stop that appointment. And it doesn't somehow improve you in the view of God. Because you are wealthy does not mean that God is pleased with you. Now, it also doesn't mean that God is displeased with you. That happens to be, that has to do with your righteousness. That has to do with your character. That has to do with your obedience to God. That's how we are pleasing to God, not by way of our wealth. And here this is immediately, now we need to go to verse 10, to the proverb prior to this, because they are linked together. They go together by theme. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. It's the Lord that protects us. He's the one that protects us. And Here is the wealthy man thinks that his wealth is his strong city. In his own conceit, he thinks he sees it as a high wall. It's not. Now, in this proverb, the rich man is literally a man of material wealth. And he believes his wealth is going to protect him. He believes his wealth is that high wall. And it's by his own conceit he thinks this, but he's wrong. He's wrong. Well, how do I know that? Because verse 10. Verse 10 says it's the Lord that's the strong tower. All right, if that's an option, there's the Lord, that's a strong tower, or there's wealth, that's a strong tower too. Well, there is no option. Yeah, wealth, material wealth, doesn't give you anything permanent. And it cannot solve every problem. It's pleasant to have. It provides certain pleasantries, certain even to that of luxuries, and more so. But it doesn't put you in a better place where it becomes a high wall or protection or a strong tower. That's only from God. That's only from God. Nor does it, can you purchase your way into heaven? You can't do that. That's an impossibility. Everything belongs to God anyway. Why would he need your 2 bits to get you into to put you into heaven? Well, he doesn't. He wants something more from us than that. All right. So what can we conclude from these two? That the first one, 10 and verse 15. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. This concerns spiritual wealth. That's what this concerns. Whereas 18:11, and like a high wall in his own esteem, this concerns misplaced confidence in material wealth. The first one isn't really about material wealth. It's spiritual wealth. This one is about material wealth, and it's a misplaced belief, or it's having been deceived that material wealth is going to be the answer and is going to help you regardless of what's in your life. And that's simply not true. And so with both of these, we see the opening phrase being, the meaning of that opening phrase being changed by the closing phrase. And it changes the meaning entirely by the close of it. And that's what when we were talking about that you can't separate this couplet. You can't do it because you have something that you don't have the full proverb. You don't have everything. And in some cases, it doesn't even make sense. It wouldn't even make sense. And so we come back to, we just now go on to verse 12. We wanted to do that for verse 11 and taking us also back to chapter 10 and 15. And because they have similarities, that opening phrase, but they don't have the same meaning. They're not concerned with the same things. One is spiritual, the other is literally material. Okay, verse 12. Before destruction, the heart of a man is haughty, and before honor is humility. Okay, now we can go back to verse 3, and we see that there is, the phrase is different from, the wording in this is different from verse 3, 18 verse 3. When the wicked comes, contempt also comes, and with dishonor comes reproach. All right, coming down to verse 12, and before honor is humility. Which means we can just, with humility comes honor. We could say that in verse 3. With humility comes honor. But it says with dishonor comes reproach. So those two are very similar. The wording has been switched a bit, And also in verse 12, before destruction, the heart of a man is haughty. We could change that of haughtiness, being haughty comes before destruction. It's switched the order of that. What comes before? Well, actually, it's destruction and honor, and then what came before them in verse 12. Now, verse 13, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. James 1 and verse 19 says we are to be swift to hear, slow to speak. You cannot just jump to a conclusion without hearing the matter. It would be an absurd thing, and it would be unjust to hear the opening, a judge in an actual court hearing the opening argument of, let's say, the prosecution, the opening argument of the prosecution, and okay, well, that's good enough for me. That's good. The guy's guilty. That's good. I don't need to hear anything else. That sounds good to me. There's no point in anybody saying anything else. Well, to have justice is to hear the whole matter. And it could be somebody's lying here. It could be. It could be that there's a misunderstanding. It could be that if we look a little bit deeper, we find that he may be guilty or he may be innocent. He may be completely innocent. But we have to hear the whole matter before there can be any kind of decision, before there can be any kind of judgment on it. I remember a fellow years ago talking about a particular man, and he said, you want to know how you can get that man on your side of any argument you may have? He said the way you get him on your side is you talk to him first. Don't let the opposition talk to him. You talk to him first. If you talk to him first, he's convinced. That's all he needed. He's convinced. He'll never listen to the other side. Never. He will never judge it. And if your enemy or your opponent or whoever it was that had the other side of the argument, if they got to him first, he'll never listen to you. Well, that's no good. That is the opposite of what we're supposed to be. The complete opposite. You can't judge a matter before you've actually heard it. You might as well not hear anything and flip a coin. You're coming down to the same kind of decision making. You don't know what you actually did. Now, coming down to verse 14. The spirit of a man will sustain him in sickness, but who can bear a broken spirit? Now, it wasn't too long ago that we talked about a broken spirit and how that can actually have a bearing on you physically. It can. That our emotions do have an effect on us physically. There's two sides to us. There's the physical side, and there's the spirit. There's the soul that resides inside the physical portion of us. And the spirit, that is the emotions, and the soul itself can have an effect on the body. Having that broken spirit, what does that mean? That is someone who is utterly discouraged, someone who is despondent, someone who cannot be encouraged, or it doesn't appear to be. They probably could be. That they are so sorrowful, depressed, broken, that it does, who can bear a broken spirit? But notice the first part of this. The Spirit of the man will sustain him in sickness. That someone who is encouraged, I can help him through. Someone who sees a future, who has a purpose, in mind of, when I'm done with this, well, yeah, I'm going to enjoy these better days, or I have other things to do. Well, that can definitely help you in a time of sickness. Now, granted, I'm not going to deny this. There is what is known as fatal diseases. There are things that are in fact lethal, and there's no known cure. There's chronic illnesses that you'll have for the rest of your life, but there's also fatal illnesses, which in time, that's the thing that's likely to kill you. Okay. But one can definitely have a Spirit sustaining them through that, and we usually call those people courageous. We call them an encouragement to the rest of us, because they could see, even in that time of difficulty, they could see the good in it. And they were continuing to be good in it. That they weren't being selfish, and they weren't being just swallowed up in their own grief, that they could stand, and they could continue on. And someone who is encouraged is someone who's able to take such difficulties better. And sometimes there are folks that there's really nothing wrong with them physically, except they're just depressed. And I'm using that word just because that can be helped. That there really is no sickness there. They could use some company. They could use someone to help them along and to encourage them. Matter of fact, going back decades ago with Dr. Death, I forgot his name. I'll get his name in a bit. I got other doctors in my head. But he was the spokesman for euthanasia, for what was called mercy killing. It's not mercy killing. It's called murder, is what it's called. And he gave the promise that he would never do such a thing to because he was a doctor, he would never do such a thing to someone who didn't have some kind of lethal disease, terminal disease. He wasn't going to do it unless there was somebody with the terminal disease. I'm sorry, you don't get to kill anybody that's innocent. It doesn't matter how diseased they are. You don't get to kill about it. And the thing about it is, his second and his third recorded victim, second and third, had, according to the autopsy, had nothing, neither one of them had anything wrong with them physically. Neither one of them. They were either convinced they had something, or they were just depressed. That's the power of a broken spirit. And having someone that comes in and says, I can solve this for you. Oh, that's great. I kill you. That's not so great. That's not so good. It's someone who's trying to help you out, not kill you, but try to help you through whatever is occurring in your life that is breaking your spirit. And all right, we have come to the end for this morning. I thank everybody for being with us, and hopefully next week we can continue